You are just a stockbroker, Mom laughed, waving her hand as if flicking away a fly. To my family, I was invisible compared to my brother's brick-and-mortar empire. But then the breaking news alert screamed across the television. The anchor announced that the entire financial market was crashing, and the only person who could save the American economy was the silent daughter sitting right at their dinner table. My name is Madeline Rhodes. I am 30 years old, and in the concrete canyons of the Chicago Loop, people whisper my name with a mixture of reverence and terror. But here, in the manicured suburbs of Arlington Springs, Texas, I was just the disappointment who flew home for Sunday dinner. The flight from O'Hare to DFW had been turbulent, but it was nothing compared to the atmospheric pressure inside the Rhodes family dining room. This was not a meal, it was a tribunal. The room itself was designed to intimidate, dominated by a long, polished walnut table that could seat 12, but currently held only 4. Above us, a crystal chandelier the size of a small car cast a harsh, interrogating light, reflecting off the silver cutlery that my mother had aligned with surgical precision. I took my seat on the left side of the table, the exile's chair. At the head of the table sat my father, Robert Rhodes, the founder and chairman of the Rhodes Landmark Group. He cut his steak with the same aggressive deliberation he used to sign demolition orders. To his right was my brother, Brandon, leaning back in his chair with the arrogant ease of a man who had never been told no, and opposite me sat my mother, Eleanor, her eyes scanning the table settings for imperfections before finally landing on the biggest imperfection in the room, me. "So," Mom began, her voice dripping with that uniquely Southern blend of sweetness and arsenic, "how is life in the Windy City, Madeline? Still staring at those computer screens all day?" I unfolded my napkin, placing it across my lap with practiced calm. "Work is fine. Mom, busy." "Busy?" she echoed, looking at Father as if to share a private joke. "She says she is busy. Robert, doing what? Exactly." I tried to explain it to Mrs. Gable at the club yesterday. She asked what you do, and I honestly did not know what to tell her. I just said you work with numbers. "I manage investment portfolios," I said quietly, reaching for the water glass. "Right," Brandon chimed in, swirling the red wine in his glass. He was wearing a new watch, a gold timepiece that looked heavy enough to anchor a boat. "You buy and sell stocks. Click a button, buy. Click a button, sell. It is basically a video game, right, Maddie?" "It is a bit more complex than that," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "You are just a stockbroker, Madeline," Mom interrupted, her tone final. She sliced a piece of asparagus. "There is no shame in it. I suppose not everyone has the head for real business. But let us be honest, it is just paper. You move paper around for some tiny firm in Chicago that nobody has ever heard of. It is not exactly building an empire, is it?" I looked at her. I really looked at her. I cataloged the micro-expression of disdain twitching at the corner of her mouth. I recorded the tone, the pitch, the exact phrasing. Just a stockbroker. "Speaking of empires," Brandon said, unable to hold it in any longer. He sat up straighter, puffing out his chest. "Dad, the Clearwater Bay deal? Closed it on Friday. Signed, sealed, delivered." Father looked up from his steak, a genuine smile breaking through his stony facade. "Is that a fact? The waterfront property?" "The whole stretch," Brandon beamed. 12 acres. We are going to put up a luxury resort that will make the Ritz look like a motel. And the best part? The commission structure. My bonus this quarter is going to hit $300,000. $300,000. Father nodded appreciatively. "That is good work, son. That is real money. Already put a deposit down on the new Porsche 911 GT3. Brandon grinned, shooting a glance at me. "You know, Maddie, you should let me take you for a spin when I get it. Might be a nice change of pace from that. What is it you drive again? A 5-year-old Honda?" "It is a Toyota," I corrected. "And it runs fine?" "A Toyota," Brandon laughed, shaking his head. "You are 30 years old. Madeline, You are living in a rental apartment the size of a shoebox and driving a sedan that sounds like a lawnmower. Meanwhile, I just secured a project worth $40 million. Do you see the difference? I see the difference, I said. The difference was that Brandon's $300,000 bonus was less than what my algorithms generated in interest every single hour. 7 days a week. Regardless of whether I was working or sleeping, the difference was that I could buy the entire Porsche dealership without checking my bank balance. But I did not say that. I cut my chicken. Your brother is building things, Father said, pointing his knife at me for emphasis. That is the Rhodes philosophy. Madeline, real things, brick, mortar, steel, land. The Rhodes Landmark Group is worth hundreds of millions because we own things you can touch. You can stand on our land. You can sleep in our hotels. That is legacy. What do you have? Stocks? Bonds? It is all air. It is gambling for people who are afraid to get their hands dirty. It is capital allocation, I said. It is about efficiency. It is playing the lottery. Father scoffed. And look where it has gotten you. You are working for wages. Madeline, you are an employee. In this family, we do not work for people. People work for us. I took a sip of water. I have a specific group of private clients. I have full autonomy. Clients? Mom sighed. You mean strangers who yell at you when the market goes down a point? It sounds exhausting. Darling. And for what? So you can pay rent on a lease? In the corner of the room, the large television was tuned to FNN, the financial news network. The volume was low, a constant hum of market chatter that usually served as background noise for my father's gloating. But my ears, trained to filter signal from noise, picked up the shift in the anchor's tone. I glanced over. The banner at the bottom of the screen was flashing red. The headline read, Mystery Whale Emash continues to defy market trends. Look at that, Father said, gesturing vaguely at the screen with his fork. They are talking about some hotshot investor again. These kids today, they get lucky on one tech stock or some cryptocurrency, and suddenly they think they are geniuses. MR, probably some kid in a basement. They say this MR character has beaten the S&P 500 by 200% for 7 years straight, Brandon said, squinting at the screen. That is impossible. It is a Ponzi scheme. Has to be. Nobody makes those numbers legit. Exactly, Father agreed. It will all come crashing down. Just like .com, just like housing, and when it does, that MR person will be broke, and we will still be here, collecting rent, because we own real assets. I watched the screen. They were showing a graph of my performance curve. It was a beautiful, steep ascent that defied gravity. The kid in the basement. Father had called me. If only he knew that the MR on the screen was sitting across from him, wearing a clearance rack cardigan and eating dry chicken. Madeline, Mom said, her voice shifting gears. She adopted a tone of benevolent pity, the kind usually reserved for sick pets. We have been talking, your father and I. I pulled my eyes away from the TV. About what? About your future, she said. We hate to see you struggling up there in Chicago, alone, working so hard for so little. It is not dignified for a Rhodes. We want to offer you a second chance, Brandon said, leaning forward. He looked like he was bestowing a great honor upon a peasant. We are restructuring the finance department at the group. We need someone to handle the books. You know, payroll, basic cash flow, keeping the auditors off our backs. We want you to come home, Father said. Be the CFO of Rhodes Landmark Group. It is a big title. Sounds a lot better than stockbroker. You would answer to Brandon. Of course, since he will be taking over as CEO eventually. But you would be family. You would be safe. And, Mom added, lowering her voice as if sharing a conspiracy, if you do a good job, and if you can show us that you have grown out of this rebellious phase, your father is willing to gift you a small percentage of equity in the company, maybe 1% to start, eventually. 1%. They were offering me 1% of a company that was leveraged to the hilt, drowning in debt, and exposed to commercial real estate risks that my models had flagged as toxic 6 months ago. They wanted me to quit my job as the chief investment officer of the most successful private fund in history to become their bookkeeper. You want me to handle payroll, I clarified. And accounts payable, Brandon added. I hate dealing with contractors calling about invoices. You are good at details. It fits you. I looked at them. I looked at Brandon, puffed up with his $300,000 bonus. I looked at Father, convinced his brick-and-mortar kingdom was invincible. I looked at Mom, who saw her daughter as a broken thing that needed fixing. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was the feeling of a shutter clicking. Click. I recorded Brandon's smirk. Click. I recorded Mom's pity. Click. I recorded Father's arrogance. I was storing it all, every word, every glance. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to pull out my phone and show them my bank account. I wasn't going to tell them that I could buy their entire empire with the cash I kept in my checking account for emergencies. Because the data set wasn't complete yet. I appreciate the offer, I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. But I think I will stay in Chicago for now. I have some obligations to my clients. Suit yourself, Brandon scoffed, stabbing a potato. Enjoy your little apartment, but do not come crying to us when that little firm of yours lays you off. I won't, I promised. On the television screen, the red banner flashed again. Breaking news. The volume on the TV seemed to swell, cutting through the clinking of silverware. The anchor's face had gone pale. We interrupt this program for a special bulletin, the voice from the TV said. We are receiving reports of a massive liquidity crisis developing in the Asian markets. Futures are plummeting. But first, we have breaking news regarding the identity of the mystery investor known as MR. The Securities and Exchange Commission has just released a mandatory disclosure filing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Once, twice, then a continuous vibration. Father frowned. Turn that TV off. Brandon, we are having a family discussion. Wait, Brandon said, his remote control hand freezing in midair. Did he say $3 billion? One moment, the anchor on the screen continued. We can now confirm the identity of the individual who has outperformed every major hedge fund on Wall Street for the last decade. The mysterious MR is a woman. Mom stopped chewing. She looked at the TV, then slowly turned her head to look at me. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. The trial was over. The verdict was about to be read, but not by them. The electronic hum of the television suddenly spiked in volume. The low murmur of the financial ticker was replaced by an urgent, staccato alert tone that cut through the thick tension of our dining room like a serrated knife. A crimson graphic emblazoned with the words, "Breaking news," pulsed rhythmically on the screen, bathing the pristine white tablecloth in an ominous, bloody light. Father slammed his fork down. The clatter of silver against china was violent. "Brandon, I told you to turn that off," he barked, his face flushing a deep red that matched the screen. "We are having a serious conversation about your sister's future. I will not have our dinner interrupted by sensationalist nonsense." Brandon reached for the remote, his thumb hovering over the power button, but then the anchor's voice, boom, louder and faster than before, stopped him cold. We returned to our developing story regarding the most significant financial revelation of the decade. The news anchor announced, he was a silver-haired man I recognized, a veteran journalist who usually reserved this level of gravity for wars or presidential scandals. For 7 years, Wall Street has been haunted by a ghost, a single entity, operating under the code name MR, has consistently outperformed every major hedge fund, every algorithm, and every veteran trader on the floor. The returns were statistically impossible. They were calling it the Phantom Alpha, the Holy Grail. "Turn it off," Father commanded, his patience snapping. "It is just noise. Brandon, do it." "Wait," Brandon said. He did not look at Father. He was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. "Did you hear what he said about the returns? Listen to the yield." The anchor continued, unaware of the domestic dispute he was fueling. "Until this morning, The identity of MR was the most closely guarded secret in global finance. Theories ranged from a rogue artificial intelligence to a consortium of central banks. But today, due to a mandatory disclosure triggered by the sheer volume of assets under management, a filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission has forced the ghost into the light. I watched my family. I watched the way the annoyance on my mother's face slowly curdled into confusion. I saw Father's jaw set in a line of hard granite. They were still annoyed, still dismissive, believing this was just another story about a world they did not understand and did not respect. The filing reveals that MR is not a consortium, the anchor said, leaning into the camera for dramatic effect. It is not a government agency. It is not an artificial intelligence. The entity that has cornered the volatility market is a single individual, and in a shock to analysts everywhere, she is a woman, a 30-year-old woman. The silence in the dining room was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the booming voice from the television. 30 years old. The same age Brandon had mocked 5 minutes ago. Mom stopped chewing. Her fork hovered halfway to her mouth. She looked at the TV. Then she turned her head slowly, stiffly, to look at me. Her eyes were wide, searching for a joke, a coincidence, anything that would allow her reality to remain intact. The investor, the anchor pronounced, punctuating every syllable, is Madeline Rhodes. She is the founder and chief investment officer of Harbor Point Capital, based in Chicago. The name hung in the air, Madeline Rhodes. It was not a common name, it was my name. On the screen, the broadcast cut to a live feed from Chicago. It showed the North River Tower, a 70-story fortress of glass and steel that dominated the riverfront. It was the building Father had criticized in a trade magazine last year, calling it a soulless monument to temporary wealth. Now, the screen showed a swarm of news vans, satellite trucks, and reporters camped outside the main plaza. A chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Harbor Point, Capital Headquarters, live. This is the epicenter, the field reporter shouted over the wind. We are standing outside the offices of Madeline Rhodes. Security has locked down the building, but we have reports that representatives from the Treasury Department are already inside. I sat perfectly still. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply reached out and placed my water glass back on the table. The condensation on the glass left a perfect wet ring on the tablecloth. That small circular stain was the only mark I made on the physical world, while the digital world burned around us. Let us talk numbers, the anchor said, bringing a graphic up on the screen behind him. It was a bar chart that looked less like financial data and more like the launch trajectory of a rocket. According to the SEC filing, Ms. Rhodes began her fund 7 years ago with a personal savings account of just $60,000. Brandon let out a breath that sounded like a hiss. $60,000. That was less than the down payment on his new Porsche. Today, the anchor continued, his voice dropping to a hush of reverence, her personal net worth is estimated at $3.4 billion. The spoon dropped from my mother's hand. It hit the edge of her plate and clattered onto the floor, but she did not move to pick it up. She did not even blink. $3.4 billion, Brandon whispered. The words felt foreign in his mouth, heavy and impossible. He looked at me, his eyes darting back and forth as if trying to reconcile the sister in the cardigan with the number on the screen. And that is just her personal capital, the anchor went on, delivering the second blow. Through Harbor Point Capital, Madeline Rhodes manages over $18 billion in assets for a select group of private clients and institutional partners. Her fund has posted an average annual return of over 200%, a figure that defies every known model of modern portfolio theory. $18 billion. The number was so large it was abstract. It was the GDP of a small nation. It was enough to buy the Rhodes Landmark Group 50 times over and still have enough left to demolish every building and turn the land into parks. No, Brandon stammered. He shook his head, a nervous, jagged laugh escaping his throat. No, that is crazy. Madeline Rhodes? It is a common name. It has to be a coincidence. Right, Dad, it is just a name. Father was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing, searching for the deception. Of course it is a coincidence, he stated, though his voice lacked its usual booming authority. Our Madeline is a broker. She manages small accounts. She told us so herself. This is some other woman, some other Rhodes. Just a stockbroker, Mom whispered, repeating her own insult from earlier. It sounded like a prayer now. She is just a stockbroker. Then the television took away their last place to hide. We have obtained the official bio photo from the Harbor Point website, the anchor said. The image on the screen changed. It was a high-resolution portrait. It was black and white, stark, professional, and terrifyingly clear. It was me. The hair was pulled back in the same severe bun I wore now. The glasses were the same thin wire frames resting on my nose at this very moment. The expression was the same impassive, calculating look I had given them every time they told me I was not good enough. There was no denying it. The face on the screen, looming over the entire nation, was the face sitting at the dinner table. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a worldview shattering. Father looked from the screen to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes, not anger, fear. He was looking at a stranger, a titan who had been living in his house, eating his food, and enduring his lectures while silently holding the power to buy his entire existence. Then, the sound began. It started with my phone. It was sitting on the table next to my plate. It buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it began a continuous, angry vibration that rattled the silverware. I glanced at the screen. Treasury Secretary, urgent line. I did not answer. A second later, Father's phone, tucked in his jacket pocket, began to ring. It was the harsh, loud ringtone he used for business calls. He reached for it reflexively, his hand trembling slightly. Then Mom's phone, inside her purse on the sideboard, began to chirp. Then Brandon's phone, right there on the table, lit up. The room was suddenly a cacophony of digital noise. It was a symphony of validation. Father looked at his screen. It is the bank, he said, his voice hollow. It is the CEO of United Continental. He is calling me on a Sunday night. I have 5 texts, Brandon said, his voice rising in panic. Jim from the club, my college roommate, the broker for the Florida deal. They are all sending me the screenshot. They are asking if she is my sister. Mom pulled her phone from her purse, staring at it as if it were a bomb. Mrs. Gable, she whispered, and the head of the charity committee, and, oh my God, my sister in Phoenix. The phones continued to scream. The news anchor continued to speak, dissecting my career, analyzing my trades, praising my genius. The red light from the television flickered over our faces. Madeline, Father said. It was not a command. It was a question. It was a plea. He held his ringing phone in his hand, afraid to answer it, afraid to ignore it. Madeline, is that real? I looked at him. I looked at the $3.4 billion figure still hovering on the screen behind the anchor's head. I thought about the 1% equity they had offered me 5 minutes ago. I thought about the position of payroll manager. I picked up my phone. I silenced the call from the Treasury Secretary. Then I looked Father in the eye. It is real, I said. The air left the room. The power dynamic did not just shift. It evaporated and reformed instantly, with me at the center of the gravitational pull. The dinner was over. The trial was over. The execution was about to begin. But I was no longer the one on the block. The cacophony of ringing phones in the dining room faded into a dull roar in my ears, replaced by the echo of older, quieter memories. As my father stared at me with that newfound terror, I was not looking at him. I was looking through him, back to the years when I was simply the invisible daughter, the background noise to Brandon's golden future. In the Rhodes household, you were measured by your physical footprint. Brandon was loud, took up space, and broke things. Therefore, He was a leader. I was quiet, occupied corners, and fixed things. Therefore, I was irrelevant, while Brandon was being groomed to inherit the kingdom of brick and mortar, taken to construction sites, and taught how to yell at contractors. I was left to my own devices. My devices were graph paper and calculators. I remembered sitting on the floor of the living room at age 9. Brandon was building a tower out of blocks, receiving applause from our parents for every story he added. I was sitting 5 feet away, mapping the probability of the tower falling based on its leaning angle. When I tried to show Mom my calculations, she had laughed, a sound devoid of malice but full of dismissal. "Oh, Madeline," she had said, brushing my hair out of my face. "You and your little papers. You cannot live inside a graph, honey. Real life is house and land. Hustle life is what you can touch." That was the mantra. If you could not touch it, it was not real. By high school, the gap had widened. I was the strange girl who ate lunch in the computer lab, obsessed with patterns. It was Mr. Henderson, my calculus teacher, who first saw me. He did not see a quiet girl. He saw a mind that processed variables faster than the school's outdated desktop computers. He was the one who pushed me toward the scholarship at Midland State University, a school my father called adequate because it was not in the Ivy League, and therefore not a status symbol he could brag about at the country club. Midland State was where I discovered that the world had a heartbeat. I vividly recalled the first time I saw a Bloomberg terminal in the university finance lab. To the other students, the scrolling green and red numbers were just prices. To me, they were music. I could see the rhythm in the chaos. I saw how a drought in Brazil affected coffee futures in New York, and how that rippled into shipping stocks in London. It was a living, breathing organism, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could speak its language. I started writing code in my dorm room, while my roommates were out partying. I was building algorithms, teaching a computer to see what I saw. Then came the summer of my junior year. I landed an internship at Piermont Ridge Partners, a prestigious hedge fund in New York. I thought this was it. I thought I had found my tribe. I was wrong. I was assigned to a vice president named Preston, a man who wore $3,000 suits and had a smile that never reached his eyes. For 2 months, I was a glorified coffee courier, but I kept my head down. I worked late, and one night, I found a flaw in their risk exposure regarding emerging market debt. I spent the weekend building a model to correct it, a predictive algorithm that could save the firm millions. On Monday morning, I walked into Preston's office, trembling with anticipation, and handed him the file. "This is interesting, Madeline," he had said, flipping through the pages without reading them. "Leave it with me." A week later, I sat in the back of a department meeting and watched Preston present my model to the partners. He used my graphs. He used my data. He even used the metaphors I had written in the executive summary. He took credit for every single keystroke. When I confronted him afterward, shaking with the injustice of it, he did not even look up from his phone. "Let me give you some advice, sweetheart." He had sneered, his voice dropping to a patronizing whisper. "You are support staff. You are good at homework, but you do not have the gut for the big chair. You belong in the back office, making sure the printers work. Do not dream of being an investor. It is not in your DNA." I walked out of that building and never went back. That was the moment Madeline the student died, and MR was born. I returned to Chicago with a cold, hard resolve. I withdrew my entire life savings, $60,000. It was money I had scraped together from scholarships, part-time jobs, and graduation gifts. It was everything I had. I rented a studio apartment in a neighborhood where the police sirens were a nightly lullaby. The heating was broken, and in the brutal Chicago winter, I worked wrapped in 3 blankets, blowing on my fingers to keep them nimble enough to type. I ate instant noodles until the smell made me nauseous. I cut my own hair. I walked everywhere to save on bus fare. But I had my computer, and I had my algorithm. I remembered the first trade. It was a bet on a small, struggling software company that specialized in video conferencing. My model saw a shift in remote work trends that the market was ignoring. I put $20,000 into call options. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely click the mouse. 2 weeks later, that position was worth $150,000. I did not scream. I did not call anyone. I sat in the dark, watching the blue light of the monitor, and ate my noodles. It was not about the money. It was about the fact that I was right, and Preston was wrong. From there, it was an avalanche. My model flagged a disconnect in the biotech sector. I went in. I tripled my capital. Then came the data infrastructure play. Then the short position on airline stocks before the oil spike. My $60,000 became $1 million, then $10 million. During those years, the phone calls from home were torture. "When are you going to get a real job, Madeline?" Mom would ask, her voice tinny over the speakerphone while I watched my net worth tick past $50 million. "Your father says the market is just gambling. Why don't you come home? We can find you something in leasing." I tried to tell them. Once, I tried to explain that I was building a fund, that I was developing proprietary technology. "Technology," Father had grunted in the background. "Risky. Bubbles burst. Madeline, land stays. You are chasing ghosts." So I stopped trying. I learned the power of silence. I incorporated Harbor Point Capital as a limited liability company with a nondescript name. I took on my first outside clients, not the big institutional sharks, but the people the banks had laughed at, the brilliant immigrant founder who couldn't get a loan, the mid-sized logistics company that Wall Street ignored. I made them rich, and they kept my secret. I moved into the North River Tower, taking the top 3 floors. I hired the smartest data scientists in the world, paying them double what Google offered, on the condition of absolute discretion. And then, I made the move that sat heaviest in my chest tonight. 2 years ago, when Rhodes Landmark Group was over-leveraged and desperate for cash to finish a hotel project in Austin, the banks turned them down. Father was panic-stricken. He thought he was going to lose the company. Then, miraculously, a private credit fund stepped in and bought their bonds, injecting the capital they needed to survive. They celebrated their luck. They toasted their own resilience. They never knew that the private credit fund was a subsidiary of Harbor Point Capital. I bought their debt. I owned the paper that kept the roof over their heads. I did it because I did not want them to fail, but I also did it because I needed to know I could control the outcome. I looked at my family now, frozen in the dining room. They saw a stranger on the television. They saw a billionaire. But they did not see the nights I spent shivering in that studio apartment. They did not see the humiliation in Preston's office. They did not see the years I spent suffocating my own achievements just to keep the peace at Sunday dinner. They thought I was stubborn. They thought I was lost. But all this time, while they were playing house with bricks and mortar, I was building a fortress in the sky, brick by invisible brick, waiting for the day they would finally look up. The television screen shifted to an aerial shot of Chicago, panning slowly up the sleek, obsidian facade of the North River Tower. The glass reflected the setting sun like a dark mirror, dominating the skyline. "That building," Father muttered, staring at the screen. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear a hallucination. I wrote an editorial in the Commercial Real Estate Journal last year. I called it a hollow monument to temporary capital. I said it was a glass needle waiting to break. "Well," I said, slicing a piece of potato with surgical precision, "it is actually LEED Platinum certified and fully occupied, and I own the top 3 floors." Father did not respond. He could not. The news anchor was now displaying a complex web of financial relationships on the screen. Lines connected Harbor Point Capital to various major entities across the globe. One line, thick and red, connected my firm to a logo that made the blood drain from Brandon's face. "In a twist of irony," the anchor stated, his voice filled with dramatic flair, "Harbor Point Capital is currently the largest holder of distressed debt instruments issued by United Continental Bank. This effectively makes Madeline Rhodes the primary creditor for one of the Midwest's largest regional lenders." The silence in the dining room was so profound, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator compressor. United Continental Bank. It was the institution that held the mortgages on every single strip mall, hotel, and apartment complex the Rhodes family owned. My father had spent 30 years whining and dining their loan officers, begging for favorable rates, sweating over covenants. "You own the bank," Brandon whispered. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Basically, you own the bank that owns us." "I own their debt," I corrected gently, "which gives me significant influence over their lending policies. Yes." Father's phone buzzed again. He looked at it, and for a moment, I thought he might drop it. He held the device out, his hand shaking, staring at an email notification. "It is from Jonathan Sterling," Father said. His voice was raspy. "The regional director of United Continental. He says he is honored to learn of the connection between our families. He says he would like to arrange a dinner next week to discuss restructuring our current credit lines. He ends the email with, 'Please give my best regards to your extraordinary daughter.'" Jonathan Sterling, the man who had made my father wait in the lobby for 40 minutes last Christmas before rejecting his application for a bridge loan. Now, he was sending emails on a Sunday night, begging for an audience. I took a sip of my wine. It was a cheap Merlot that Father bought by the case, usually reserved for family dinners, where he did not feel the need to impress anyone. It tasted like vinegar, but tonight it tasted like victory. Brandon was tapping furiously on his phone. The calculator app open. I could see his lips moving as he did the math. $3.4 billion, he murmured to himself. Then he looked up at me, his eyes wide and glassy. "Madeline, the entire Rhodes Landmark Group, the hotels, the land in Florida, the apartments in Arlington, if we sold everything tomorrow, paid off the debt, and liquidated every asset, we are worth maybe 80 million. Maybe." He paused, swallowing hard. "You make that in a month," he said. "On a bad month." "Volatility has been profitable lately," I admitted. This was the tipping point. The numbers were too big to argue with. The reality was too solid to deny. The dynamic in the room fractured and then hastily reassembled itself. But this time, I was not the accused. I was the judge. Mom was the first to attempt a pivot. It was a maneuver I had seen her perform 1,000 times at social galas, when she realized she was talking to someone more important than she initially thought. Her posture softened. Her face relaxed into a mask of maternal warmth that looked eerie in the harsh light of the chandelier. "Maddie, darling," she said, her voice trembling with a fabricated emotion. She reached across the table, her fingers inching toward my hand. I did not pull away, but I did not reciprocate. "You have to understand. We were hard on you because we knew what you were capable of. We always knew you were special. We just wanted to push you, to make sure you were tough enough for this world." "Is that right?" I asked. "Of course," she continued, gaining confidence. "All those times we told you to come home, to get a real job. We were just worried. We are old-fashioned. Your father and I, we did not understand the technology, but deep down, we always believed in you. A mother knows her child. I knew you were building something magnificent." She looked around the table, seeking validation. "Right, Robert. We were just saying the other day how proud we were of her independence." I placed my knife and fork down on the plate. The clink cut through her monologue. "Mom," I said. My voice was low, devoid of anger, which made it all the more terrifying to them. If my face had not appeared on that television screen 10 minutes ago, if the world was crashing but my name was not attached to the solution, would you be saying any of this? I looked at her. I waited. "Would you be calling me a genius?" I asked. "Or would you still be telling me I'm just a stockbroker who needs to learn how to file payroll for Brandon?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at her napkin. She could not lie, not with the truth staring at her from the television screen. "That is what I thought," I said. Suddenly, Brandon's phone rang. It was a jarring, cheerful ringtone that seemed completely out of place in the morgue-like atmosphere of the dining room. He looked at the caller ID and frowned. "It is Marcus Thorne," Brandon said, looking confused. "Thorne Development?" Father asked, perking up. "The CEO of the group that blocked our zoning permit in Austin? The one who called our company a dinosaur?" "Yeah," Brandon said. He answered the phone, putting it on speaker without thinking. "Hello, Marcus?" "Brandon!" The voice on the other end was booming, overly friendly. "How are you, my friend? Long time no talk. Listen, I am watching the news right now, and I nearly choked on my scotch. Is it true? Is Madeline Rhodes actually your little sister?" Brandon looked at me. I stared back, impassive. "Yes," Brandon said weakly. "She is sitting right here." "Incredible!" Marcus shouted. "Absolutely incredible. Look, Brandon, old buddy, I know we have had our differences, but business is business, right? I have been trying to get a meeting with Harbor Point Capital for 2 years. 2 years! They won't even return my calls. We are looking to raise a capital round for a massive mixed-use project in Denver. High yield, very exclusive. I was hoping, well, since you are family, maybe you could facilitate an introduction? Just a quick coffee?" Brandon held the phone, his hand trembling. He was the heir apparent, the golden boy, and now he was being reduced to a secretary, a gatekeeper for a sister he had bullied his entire life. He looked at me, his eyes begging for a script. I did not blink. I spoke clearly, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Tell him I am not taking new clients," I said. Brandon flinched. "Marcus, she says—" "I heard her," Marcus said, his voice dipping in disappointment, but retaining a desperate edge. Of course, she is busy. But maybe later? Brandon, work on her for me, will you? We could make it worth your while. We could revisit that zoning issue in Austin." "I have to go, Marcus," Brandon said, and hung up. He set the phone down as if it were contaminated. Father cleared his throat. He had recovered from the initial shock of the bank email and was now shifting into the only mode he knew: survival. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table, trying to summon the aura of the chairman. "Madeline," he began, his tone serious, businesslike. "Let us be practical. This situation changes things, obviously." "Obviously," I agreed. "You have capital," he said, "significant capital, and we have assets, tangible assets, but we are liquidity constrained. That is the nature of real estate. You know this." He gestured around the room, encompassing the house, the lifestyle, the company. "We should sit down tomorrow," Father proposed. "Properly, with the lawyers. We can draft a partnership agreement. You could come on board not as an employee, but as a strategic advisor, a partner. We could use a portion of your liquid reserves, just a small fraction, really, to pay down the high-interest debt on the landmark properties. Then we leverage your balance sheet to expand nationwide. We could double the size of the family empire in 5 years, together." He smiled. It was the smile of a man who thought he was offering me a favor. He thought he was inviting me into the club. He still believed, deep down, that his buildings were the prize, and my money was just the fuel to keep them standing. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had dismissed my work as gambling for a decade. "Father," I said softly, "I run a quantitative fund that targets alpha through market inefficiencies and volatility arbitrage. My target internal rate of return is 40%. I paused to let the number sink in. "Rhodes Landmark Group," I continued, reciting the numbers I had memorized from their public filings, "operates on a net margin of 6%. Your debt-to-equity ratio is dangerous. Your growth is barely keeping pace with inflation. You are exposed to commercial office space trends that are in secular decline." Father's smile faltered. "I do not invest in sentiment," I said, "and I do not invest in business models that rely on the generosity of bankers like Jonathan Sterling to survive. If this was a pitch deck from a stranger, I would not even finish reading the first page." "I am your father," he sputtered, his face reddening. "And that is the only reason I'm sitting at this table," I replied. "But do not confuse biology with business. You asked for a partner. I am telling you, as an investor, that I do not buy into sinking ships just because I know the captain. It was not an insult, it was an analysis. But in the Rhodes household, truth was the deadliest weapon of all. The atmosphere in the dining room shifted from stunned silence to a frantic, electric tension. The financial news network anchor, who had just spent 10 minutes dissecting my net worth, suddenly pressed a finger to his earpiece. His expression hardened. The biography graphic of my face was replaced by a chaotic swirl of red tickers and plummeting trend lines. "We are shifting gears," the anchor announced, his voice tight with controlled panic. "We are receiving disturbing reports from the futures markets. In the last 15 minutes, pre-market indicators for the energy and technology sectors have broken through critical support levels. The volatility index is spiking at a rate we have not seen since the housing collapse. Traders are whispering about a liquidity freeze. We are looking at the potential for a new Black Monday." Father stopped chewing. He looked at the screen, then at his phone, then back at the screen. He understood enough about the economy to know that when the words liquidity freeze were spoken on national television, people like him, people who lived on borrowed money, were the first to bleed. "It is a glitch," Brandon said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Algorithms go haywire all the time. It will correct." "It is not correcting, Brandon," I said softly. "It is cascading." On the screen, a new guest had joined the broadcast via satellite. It was a senior analyst from a major rating agency, a man who usually spoke in measured, soothing tones. Tonight, he looked disheveled. "The market is reacting to a systemic disconnect in the derivatives market," the analyst explained rapidly. "There is a massive accumulation of risk that no standard model predicted. No model, that is, except one." The anchor leaned forward. "Are you referring to the Rhodes model?" "I am," the analyst confirmed. "For years, regulators have suspected that the entity known as MR possessed a predictive algorithm capable of foreseeing these exact chain reactions. We call it the chaos hedge. Now that we know MR is Madeline Rhodes, the question is not what the market will do. The question is, does she have the solution?" My phone began to vibrate on the table again. This time, the screen did not display a number. It did not display a name. It displayed a single, pulsating blue shield icon. It was a secure line, a direct channel established years ago for theoretical emergencies that I had hoped would never become practical realities. I let it buzz. The sound was a low, angry drill against the mahogany table. "Answer it," Father snapped, his nerves fraying. "For God's sake, Madeline, turn it off or answer it." "I am eating dinner," I said, picking up my fork. "Eating dinner?" Brandon stared at me as if I were insane. "The TV just said the economy is melting down, and they are talking about your math, and you are eating a potato?" The news anchor's voice cut through the room again. "We are getting word from our sources in D.C. that the Treasury Department has been attempting to establish contact with Madeline Rhodes for the last 30 minutes. If you are watching, Ms. Rhodes, the markets are waiting." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother looked at the television, then at the vibrating phone, and finally at me. The realization washed over her face like a cold tide. She was not sitting with her daughter, the freelance computer worker. She was sitting with a geopolitical asset. "They are calling you," Mom whispered. Her hand flew to her mouth. "The government, the Treasury, they are calling you." On the screen, the producers began running a montage of old financial headlines, a frantic slideshow of the past 7 years. The North River ghost. Who is winning every trade? Is Wall Street dependent on one mind? The trillion-dollar algorithm. I watched my family watch the screen. These were magazines that had sat on their own coffee table. These were newspapers Father subscribed to. They had looked at these headlines for years. They had probably read them while sipping coffee, wondering who this MR genius was, never once looking up to see their daughter sitting across the room, coding on a battered laptop. "I read that article," Brandon murmured, pointing at a headline from Forbes. "I read it 3 years ago. I told my broker we should find out who MR is and copy their trades. He looked at me, his face draining of color. The arrogance of the new Porsche and the Florida deal was gone. In its place was the terrifying clarity of a debtor. "Madeline," Brandon said, his voice trembling. "If the credit markets freeze, if the banks stop lending tonight, the Florida deal, the construction loans, we have a balloon payment due on the Arlington properties next month." He did not have to finish the sentence. If the market crashed the way the TV was predicting, liquidity would evaporate. Banks would call in loans. Rhodes Landmark Group, leveraged to the hilt and cash poor, would be insolvent by Friday. "We would be wiped out," Father said. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the abyss. "We have no cash reserves. If the rates spike, we are finished." They turned to me, not as a family, but as drowning sailors looking at the only lifeboat in the ocean. "Madeline," Mom said, her voice shaking. She reached out, gripping my forearm with a strength I did not know she possessed. "You have to answer that phone. Please, you have to help them. Think of the country. Think of us." It was a fascinating mix of patriotism and self-preservation. She wanted me to save the American economy. Yes, but mostly she wanted me to save her country club membership and the house with the chandeliers. The phone buzzed again. The blue shield pulsed. "Excuse me," I said. I stood up. I did not rush. I picked up the phone with the same casual motion I would use to pick up a napkin. I walked toward the French doors that opened onto the patio. "Madeline," Father called out, half rising from his chair. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to take the call," I said without turning back. I slid the glass door open and stepped out into the humid Texas night. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and impending thunderstorms. I slid the door shut behind me, sealing the sound of the television inside, but leaving the visual connection intact. Through the glass, I could see them. My father, the patriarch who had diminished me. My mother, the socialite who had hidden me. My brother, the golden boy who had mocked me. They were twisted in their chairs, watching me through the window pane like children watching an astronaut prepare for launch. I swiped the screen. "Rhodes?" I said. "Ms. Rhodes, thank God." A voice barked in my ear. It was the Undersecretary of the Treasury for Domestic Finance. I recognized the voice from previous symposiums. "We have a situation. The algorithmic trading desks are entering a feedback loop. We are seeing a sell-off trigger in the Asian markets that is going to hit New York at the opening bell like a tsunami. We need to know if your liquidity models are holding." I leaned against the stone railing of the balcony, looking out over the manicured lawn of my childhood home. "My models are stable, Mr. Undersecretary. The anomaly is in the leverage ratios of the mid-cap tech sector. You have a margin call cascade happening." "That is what we feared," he said. "The Fed is preparing an emergency injection, but we are flying blind on the scope. We need your data, Madeline. We need to know where the bottom is. Can you patch into the secure server?" Inside the dining room, Brandon was standing up, pressing his face close to the glass, trying to read my lips. I turned my back to him, facing the dark garden. "I can," I said calmly, "but you need to understand the parameters. If I interface my system with the exchange regulators, I am effectively setting the floor price. I need guarantees on the circuit breakers. I will not have my positions liquidated to save a reckless hedge fund." "You will have full immunity and direct oversight," the Undersecretary promised. "We are convening a war room. We need you on the screen in 10 minutes. The White House is monitoring." "I will be there," I said. "Madeline," the voice softened slightly. "Thank you. There is nobody else who understands this math." "I know," I said. I ended the call. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the night air. I looked at my reflection in the darkened glass of the French doors. I saw the same Madeline who used to hide in her room to avoid these people, but the woman staring back now held the fate of the Dow Jones Industrial Average in her hand. I slid the door open and stepped back into the air-conditioned chill of the dining room. The silence was heavy. They were looking at me with a reverence that was almost uncomfortable. I sat back down, placed the phone on the table, and picked up my napkin. "Well?" Father asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What did they say?" Before I could answer, the television answered for me. The anchor appeared again, looking slightly more composed. "We have just received an update. A special emergency task force is being assembled to address the market volatility. Leading the technical response will be a team of private sector experts, headed by Madeline Rhodes of Harbor Point Capital. They are calling it a financial war room." Brandon slumped back in his chair. "A war room," he repeated. "Jesus." "You are going to fix it?" Mom asked, her eyes wide. "You can stop the crash?" I looked at her. "I can mitigate the damage. I can stop the bleeding. But the market has to correct. Mom, people who took stupid risks are going to lose money. That is how it works." I saw Father flinch. He knew exactly which category he fell into. "I need my laptop," I said, standing up again. "And I need the Wi-Fi password. You changed it last Christmas and never gave it to me." It is Rhodes Success 1, Brandon stammered. Capital R, number 1 at the end. "Rhodes Success 1, I repeated, a small dry smile touching my lips. Irony noted. I walked toward the living room to retrieve my bag, leaving my dinner uneaten. Behind me, the television continued to chant my name, while the people who shared it sat in the wreckage of their own assumptions, realizing that the only success in the Rhodes family was the one they had tried their hardest to ignore. I opened my laptop on the dining table, pushing aside a crystal gravy boat to make room for the brushed aluminum chassis. The screen flickered to life, casting a cool blue light across the remains of our Sunday roast. As my fingers hovered over the keyboard, entering the complex sequence of cryptographic keys required to access the Treasury server, my mind drifted away from the tension of the room and back to the solitary darkness where this all began. I was not just logging into a trading platform, I was waking up Wave 9 to the rest of the world. Wave 9 was a rumor, a ghost story told by traders over drinks. They thought it was a high-frequency trading bot that front-ran orders by milliseconds. They were wrong. Wave 9 did not care about speed. It cared about fear. I spent 3 years coding it, night after endless night, fueled by caffeine and spite. I built it to quantify the unquantifiable. I taught the machine to read the emotional temperature of the market, to recognize the specific mathematical signature of panic before a single sell order was executed. It was a psychological seismograph. I remembered the presentation at Piermont Ridge Partners vividly. I was 24, standing in a boardroom that smelled of leather and old money, presenting the prototype. I had tried to explain that the market was not efficient. It was emotional. I showed them how we could create a dampening system to prevent systemic risk. The senior partner, a man who had made his fortune in the 80s and thought algorithms were a fad, had laughed in my face. "The market is too big to be modeled by a girl with a spreadsheet," he had sneered, tossing my report onto the table like trash. "You are trying to predict the weather by looking at a raindrop. Do not dream of controlling the ocean. Madeline, just swim in it like the rest of us." I took my report back that day. I walked out with a burning resolve in my chest. I swore then that I would never sell my code to a bank. I would never let men like him use my mind to pad their bonuses while they wrecked the economy. Instead, I would build a shield. And I did. I remembered the Lakewood incident 4 years ago. It was a Tuesday. My system flagged a massive, coordinated short attack on a municipal bond sector. Predatory funds were trying to trigger a default to cash in on credit default swaps. If they succeeded, the pension fund of Lakewood, Ohio, a city I had never visited, filled with retired teachers and firefighters I would never meet, would have evaporated. I did not call the SEC. I did not write an op-ed. I quietly deployed $200 million of capital, positioning Harbor Point as a liquidity backstop. I absorbed the selling pressure. I held the line. The attackers exhausted their leverage and broke. The bonds stabilized. The pension fund was safe. Nobody in Lakewood knew that a woman in Chicago eating cold pizza at 3 a.m. had saved their retirement. That silence was my paycheck. But there were scars, too. I looked at the scrolling lines of code on my screen and thought of Mr. Gorski, one of my first private clients. He was a good man, but he had the fatal flaw of the amateur investor: greed. When Wave 9 predicted a correction in the tech sector 2 years ago, I moved all my clients to cash. Mr. Gorski was furious. He demanded I put him back in. He screamed at me that I was leaving money on the table. Against my advice, he pulled his funds and went all in on a leverage play. 2 days later, the correction hit. He lost everything: his home, his marriage. I remembered his phone call, the sobbing, the begging for me to fix it. That was the hardest lesson. My algorithm could predict the market, but it could not cure human nature. I could not save people from their own avarice. "My God," Brandon whispered, breaking my trance. I looked up. He was reading an article on his phone, his face pale in the glow of the screen. "This article on Bloomberg," Brandon said, his voice trembling. "They are interviewing a risk analyst from Zurich. He says that without the liquidity injection protocols developed by the Rhodes model, the global derivatives market represents a $100 trillion exposure," he says. He says if you do not step in tonight, we are looking at an extinction event for the banking sector. $100 trillion. The number hung in the air. My father looked at me, and I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. He was realizing that his entire life's work, the hotels, the malls, the legacy, was just a rounding error in the equation I solved every day. From the other side of the table, I heard a sound I had not heard in years. My mother was crying. It was not the loud, performative crying she used to get her way. It was a quiet, jagged sobbing. She had her hand over her mouth, looking at me with wet, terrified eyes. She was piecing it together, the daughter she had called a dreamer. The girl she had scolded for having her head in the clouds was the only thing standing between her comfortable life and the abyss. "I am sorry," Mom choked out, though I was not sure what exactly she was apologizing for. Was it for the insults? Or was it the shame of realizing she owed her survival to the child she had respected the least? I watched her, and a memory surfaced. I was 23. Sitting in this exact chair, I had tried to explain the concept of algorithmic trading to them. I wanted to share my passion. I wanted them to see the beauty in the math. "Please, Madeline," Mom had said, cutting me off to pour more wine for Brandon. "It is all very boring. Just tell people you work in stocks. Keep it simple. Nobody wants to hear about computers at a dinner party." The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. Tonight, that same woman was hanging on every word of the technical analysis on the television. She was desperate to understand the boring math, now that it was the difference between keeping her house and losing it. "We are ready for you, Ms. Rhodes." The text prompt on my screen flashed. I took a breath. I looked at my family one last time before I entered the virtual war room. I was not doing this for them. I was not doing this to save Rhodes' Landmark Group. If it were just about them, I might have let the market burn, just to teach them the lesson Mr. Gorski learned. But I thought about the Lakewood Pension Fund. I thought about the millions of people who woke up every day, went to work, saved their money, and trusted a system that was rigged against them. They were the ones who would lose their homes if the credit markets froze tonight. They were the ones who would pay the price for Wall Street's gambling addiction. I would do it for them. "Madeline," Father said, his voice raspy, do you know what you are doing?" It was the last vestige of his paternal doubt, a reflex he could not control. I looked him in the eye. "I have been doing this for 7 years. Dad," I said calmly, "while you were building hotels, I was mapping the financial nervous system of the world. I know exactly what I'm doing." I pressed the enter key. A window opened on my screen, connecting me to a secure video conference with the heads of the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, and the CEOs of the 5 largest banks in America. "Ms. Rhodes?" the Treasury Secretary said, his voice coming through the speakers of my laptop. "Thank you for joining us. We are at your disposal." I did not look at my parents. I did not need to. I knew what they were seeing. They were seeing the shift. They were realizing that the daughter they thought they knew had been a stranger to them all along. The same girl, the same glasses, the same quiet demeanor. The only thing that had changed was the audience. And as I began to speak, dictating the terms of the liquidity rescue to the most powerful men in Washington, I felt a cold, quiet satisfaction. I had not changed. The world had just finally caught up to me. "We are going to need a bigger screen," I said, closing the distance between the dining table and the living room in 3 strides. I did not wait for permission. I grabbed the HDMI cable hanging from the back of the massive 80-inch television that usually broadcast football games or my father's favorite business news channels. I plugged it into my laptop. The image flickered for a second, then stabilized. Suddenly, the living room of the Rhodes family was no longer in Texas. It was inside the Situation Room of the United States Treasury. The screen was divided into a grid of 12 high-definition video feeds. I recognized every face. In the center was the Treasury Secretary, looking haggard and pale. To his left was the chair of the Federal Reserve. Surrounding them were the CEOs of the 5 largest investment banks in the world, men whose faces were carved onto the Mount Rushmore of capitalism, men my brother Brandon had quoted in his college essays, men my father spoke of with the hushed reverence usually reserved for religious prophets. On the national broadcast of FNN, my face was digitally blurred to protect my privacy, a standard protocol for non-public officials in sensitive crises. But here, in the raw feed displayed on the living room wall, my image was crystal clear in the top right corner. The lighting from the chandelier cast sharp shadows across my face, making me look less like a daughter and more like an inquisitor. "Ms. Rhodes? We are live," the Treasury Secretary said. His voice, amplified by the surround sound speakers, filled the room with a terrifying authority. "Thank you for patching in. The situation has deteriorated in the last 11 minutes. We are seeing a complete liquidity dry-up in the interbank lending market. The contagion is moving faster than our standard circuit breakers can handle." "I am tracking it, Mr. Secretary," I replied. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with the panic on the faces of the bankers. "The issue is not the liquidity. The issue is the counterparty trust. Nobody knows who is holding the toxic volatility swaps, so nobody is lending. You do not need money. You need vision. That is why you are here," the chair of the SEC interjected. She was a stern woman with steel-gray hair. "Our internal analysts have confirmed that your proprietary model, Wave 9, is currently the only algorithm in existence capable of mapping the cross-leverage exposure in real time. We are flying blind. Madeline, your model is the only radar that works." I felt the eyes of my family boring into my back. They were sitting on the sofas, paralyzed. "If we do not stabilize the derivatives market by the Tokyo opening bell," the SEC chair continued, "we project a cascading failure of regional pension funds and mid-tier banks. We are talking about the erasure of 40% of the retail retirement savings in this country." 40%. I heard my mother gasp behind me. 40% meant the teachers, the nurses, the factory workers. It meant the people who did not have Swiss bank accounts or gold bars in a safe. "We are prepared to offer you a consulting contract," the CEO of the largest bank in New York spoke up. He was a man named Sterling, the boss of the very man who had emailed my father earlier. "Name your price, Ms. Rhodes. We need the data feed from Wave 9 and we need it now. 50 million? 100 million? We can wire it within the hour." My father shifted in his seat. I could feel his anticipation. $100 million for a night's work. To him, that was the pinnacle of success. That was the deal of a lifetime. I looked directly into the camera lens. "I do not want your money, Mr. Sterling," I said. The silence on the line was deafening. Even the static seemed to pause. "I am sorry?" Sterling asked, blinking. "I do not think I understand." "I am not a mercenary," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "And I am not going to help you patch a hole in a boat that you deliberately drilled just to sell life jackets. I will provide the Wave 9 data. I will guide the liquidity injection. I will help you stabilize the market." Excellent. The Treasury Secretary exhaled. Then let us proceed. However, I interrupted, raising a hand, I have conditions, not financial ones, structural ones. Conditions? Sterling's face darkened. Now is not the time for negotiation, young lady. The market is burning. The market is burning because you built it out of kindling, I shot back. Here are my terms. If I step in, the Treasury agrees to an immediate ban on the high-frequency predatory algorithms that target retail stop-losses. Second, the banks represented on this call will agree to a restructuring of the consumer credit products that were designed to trap low-income borrowers. And third, the liquidity injection goes to the pension funds and insurance backers first. The hedge funds and the prop desks eat last. If there is money left over, you get saved. If not, you fail. That is preposterous, Sterling shouted. You are talking about dismantling the free market. You are talking about socialism. I am talking about mathematics, I said, and I am talking about consequences. We will not agree to this, another CEO barked. We will find another way. We do not need a 30-year-old girl telling us how to run Wall Street. Show them the simulation, I said to the empty air. I tapped a command on my keyboard. On the screen, the grid of faces shrank, replaced by the output of Wave 9. It was a map of the global financial system, a web of glowing nodes and lines, but instead of the usual blue and green, the map was bleeding. This is the projection for the do-nothing scenario, I explained, pointing to the screen. Or the find another way scenario. As you put it, the red lines represent insolvency. In 3 hours, the Asian markets crash. By 6 a.m, the European bond market freezes. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opens tomorrow, United Continental Bank, Citadel Trust, and 3 of the 5 institutions represented on this call will be technically bankrupt. I watched the screen. The red dye spread across the map like a virus, consuming everything. It showed the total vaporization of their stock value, their bonuses, their legacies. This is not a negotiation, I said softly. This is an obituary. I am just giving you the chance to edit the date. The room on the screen went silent. The CEO who had shouted at me was staring at the red map, his mouth slightly open. He looked at his colleagues. He looked at the Treasury Secretary. He saw the truth in the data, and the arrogance drained out of him, leaving only the primal fear of a man watching his fortune turn to ash. Behind me, in the living room, the silence was different. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. My father, Robert Rhodes, had spent his life preaching the gospel of the shark. He believed that the strong ate the weak, that profit was the only morality, and that mercy was a luxury for the poor. He had raised Brandon to be a predator. He had dismissed me because he thought I was prey. Now, he was watching his daughter stand in front of the masters of the universe and tell them that people mattered more than profit. He was watching me reject a $100 million check to save the retirement funds of strangers. It went against everything he had ever taught me. It defied every lesson of the Rhodes family handbook. And yet, as he looked at the red map on the screen, he realized that his strong man philosophy would have resulted in his own destruction. The only thing saving him was the daughter who cared about the weak. Brandon was sitting on the edge of the ottoman. He was staring at Marcus Sterling, the man he idolized, the man whose biography was on Brandon's nightstand. He was watching Sterling sweat. He was watching Sterling bow his head in defeat to his little sister. "My God," Brandon whispered. "They are afraid of her. They are actually afraid of her." On the screen, the Treasury Secretary cleared his throat. He looked tired, but there was a new respect in his eyes. "The terms are accepted," the Secretary said. "Mr. Sterling, do we have a consensus?" Sterling looked at the camera. He looked at me. He looked like a man swallowing broken glass. "Agreed," he rasped. "We agree to the terms. Just stop the bleeding. Ms. Rhodes?" "Good," I said. "We begin with the pension tranche. Redirect the liquidity flows to the municipal bond stabilizers. I am uploading the execution codes now." I began to type. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing the logic that I had built in the solitude of my apartment. The logic born from the insults and the dismissals. The codes are live, I said. You will see the volatility index stabilize in 4 minutes. The Asian markets should green light within the hour. Received, the SEC chair said. She looked relieved. We are seeing the pressure valve release on the bond desk already. It is working. The dominoes are stopping. Ms. Rhodes, the moderator said, his voice heavy with gravity. I hope you understand what you just did. If we did not have this model, if we did not have you, we were looking at a depression that would have lasted a decade. Wall Street needs you tonight more than it has ever needed anyone. Wall Street does not need me, I corrected him, preparing to disconnect. It needs a conscience. I am just the only one who wrote the code for it. Thank you, Madeline, the secretary said. Good night, gentlemen, I said. I pulled the HDMI cable out of my laptop. The screen went black for a second, then snapped back to the FNN broadcast. The anchor was practically shouting now. We are seeing a miraculous turnaround in the futures market. The indices are rebounding. We do not know what just happened behind closed doors, but the freefall has stopped. I closed my laptop. The click of the lid latch was the loudest sound in the room. I stood there for a moment, facing the blank television, my back to my family. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the fight. I had just gone 12 rounds with the heavyweight champions of greed, and I was the one still standing. I turned around. My father was slumped in his armchair. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He was looking at his hands, as if checking to see if they were still there. Brandon was looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. He looked at me the way you look at a natural disaster that had somehow spared your house. But it was my mother who spoke. She was sitting upright, clutching her husband's arm with a grip that turned her knuckles white. Her face was streaked with mascara, but her eyes were clear. She was looking at me, really looking at me, stripping away the layers of disappointment and expectation she had draped over me for 30 years. You said no to the money, she whispered. Her voice was trembling. You turned down the money to save everyone else. I did not answer. We told everyone you were just a stockbroker, she said, the words catching in her throat. A sob escaped her lips, a sound of profound shame. We laughed at you. We sat right here and laughed at you. And tonight, you just saved the world. My daughter saved the world. I did not save the world, Mom, I said quietly, picking up my bag. I just balanced the ledger. I walked toward the door, leaving them in the glow of the television, leaving them with the crushing realization that they had raised a hero and treated her like a servant. The market had corrected, and for the first time in the history of the Rhodes family, the value of everything was exactly where it belonged. I sat back down at the dining table. The filet mignon on my plate had turned into a cold gray island in a pool of congealed sauce. The candles had burned down to nubs, flickering weakly against the harsh overhead lights that Father had turned on during the crisis. The silence that had filled the room while I was on the call with Washington was gone, replaced by a frantic, vibrating energy that felt less like relief and more like opportunism. My family was looking at me, but they were not seeing a daughter. They were seeing a winning lottery ticket that had been sitting in their wallet for 30 years. Mom was the first to break. She reached for her wine glass, her hand shaking so badly that red liquid sloshed onto the white tablecloth, staining it like a fresh wound. She let out a sob, a wet, ragged sound that was half hysteria and half performance. I am so sorry, Madeline, she choked out, pressing a napkin to her mouth. I am so sorry. I look at you sitting there, and I feel sick. It is okay, Mom, I said automatically. It was a reflex. The dutiful daughter soothing the parent. No, it is not okay, she insisted, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. You have to understand. The pressure, the expectations. At the club, everyone talks about their children, the doctors, the lawyers, I wanted to fit in. When Mrs. Gable asked about you last week, do you know what I told her? I told her you were doing freelance data entry. I made it sound temporary. I was ashamed. She looked down at her phone, which was lighting up incessantly on the table. And now, she whispered, Mrs. Gable just texted me. She saw the news. She wants to know if I can get her husband an introduction to you. She called you a visionary. They all want to know you now. And I do not even know you. I watched her cry. I believed her regret was real, but I also saw the underlying current. She was crying because she had been wrong, but she was also crying because she was terrified she had lost access to the social currency I now represented. She was apologizing for the past, while calculating how to navigate the future. Father cleared his throat. He had recovered his composure significantly faster than Mom. The fear I had seen in his eyes during the broadcast was gone, replaced by the sharp, hungry look of a deal-maker who smells blood in the water. He straightened his tie, pushed his plate away, and leaned his elbows on the table. Eleanor, pull yourself together, he said sharply, though his eyes never left mine. Madeline does not need tears. She is a professional. She needs respect. He nodded at me, a gesture that was supposed to convey equality. I underestimated you, Madeline, Father said. I admit that. I am man enough to say it. I looked at the packaging and ignored the product. That was a mistake, a business mistake. It was a parenting mistake, I corrected him gently. He waved his hand dismissively. Business, family, it is all the same in this house. We are a dynasty, or we should be. But listening to you on that call, the way you handled Sterling, I realized something. We have been playing small ball. Rhodes Landmark Group has been thinking regionally when we should have been thinking globally. He reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of a handkerchief, he pulled out a gold pen. He tapped it rhythmically on the table. I have a proposition, Father said. His voice took on a formal, boardroom cadence. A strategic partnership. You have the liquidity. We have the operational expertise. We structure a new holding company, Rhodes Global. You inject capital to clear the current debt sheet, clean slate, and fund a nationwide expansion. In exchange, we rename the entire portfolio. Your name goes on every building right next to mine. 50-50 partners. Partners, I repeated. Think about it, he urged, his eyes gleaming. You are a genius with numbers, clearly, but you are invisible. You live in a computer. Real estate gives you a monument. It gives you a legacy. We can build towers in New York, Miami, London, the Rhodes name on the skyline, together. Before I could respond, Brandon moved. He grabbed his iPad from the sideboard and slid into the chair next to me, invading my personal space with the smell of expensive cologne and nervous sweat. Dad is thinking too small, Brandon said, swiping his screen awake. Look at this. Maddie, I have been sketching this out while you were on the call. A REIT, a real estate investment trust. He shoved the screen in my face. It was a hastily made keynote presentation. The title slide read, The Rhodes Dynasty Fund, powered by Harbor Point Capital. We take the family portfolio public, Brandon explained, talking fast, his hands gesturing wildly. We use your reputation as the mystery whale to anchor the IPO. The market will go nuts. We raise $500 million. Easy. I stay on as CEO of the development arm. You sit on the board as chairman. We use your algorithm to pick locations. It is perfect synergy. We clear the family debt, cash out mom and dad, and you and I run the show. I looked at the screen. I saw the bullet points. Synergy, leverage, brand equity. I looked at Brandon. He was smiling, a desperate, hopeful smile. He really believed this. He believed that a slide deck and a shared last name were enough to erase a lifetime of dismissal. He believed that my billions were just a battery he could plug into his toy car to make it go faster. I listened to them. I let them talk for another 5 minutes. I let Mom talk about how nice it would be to host the charity gala as the mother of the savior of Wall Street. I let Father talk about the interest rates we could command. I let Brandon talk about the jet we could buy. They were apologizing, yes, But every apology was followed by a comma, and after the comma was a request. I am sorry I called you useless, so can you pay off my loans? I am sorry I ignored you, so can you make me famous? I am sorry I mocked your job, so can you fund my company? Are you finished? I asked. My voice was soft, but it stopped them cold. I reached down to my bag, which was resting on the floor. I pulled out a thin blue folder. It was not thick. It did not have gold lettering. It was a standard manila file containing 20 pages of plain white paper. I placed it on the table in the center of the frantic energy, right on top of the wine stain. What is that? Brandon asked, frowning. This, I said, is the due diligence report on Rhodes Landmark Group. I had my team compile it 6 months ago when I bought your debt from United Continental. Father stiffened. You ran a background check on your own family? I ran a risk analysis on a distressed asset, I said. Open it. Father hesitated, then reached out and flipped the cover. He stared at the first page. It was a summary of their financial health, stripping away all the creative accounting and optimistic projections they fed to their investors. Page 4, I directed. Father turned the page. His face went gray. Your net operating income is inflated by 18%, I said, reciting the data without looking. You are capitalizing routine maintenance costs to make the bottom line look healthier. That is legal, barely, but it is sloppy. It means your buildings are decaying faster than you are reporting. I looked at Brandon. Page 7, I said. The Clearwater Bay project you are so proud of. My environmental risk models show a high probability of uninsurable storm surge damage within 5 years. That is why the other developers passed on that land. You did not get a deal. Brandon, you bought a liability. Brandon pulled the folder toward him, his eyes scanning the lines of data. No, he muttered. That is just a projection. We have a seawall plan. A seawall that costs $3 million more than your entire profit margin, I countered. I turned to Father. And the most critical number is on page 10. Your debt service coverage ratio. You are sitting at 1.05. That means for every dollar of debt payment you owe, you are only generating $1.05 of income. You are one interest rate hike away from default. If I had not stopped the market crash tonight, Father, you would have been bankrupt by breakfast. The silence returned. This time, it was heavy, suffocating. The air had been sucked out of their grandiose plans, the strategic partnership, the REIT, the global expansion. It all evaporated under the harsh light of mathematical reality. You are not a dynasty, I said, my voice devoid of malice but stripping them bare. You are a small, over-leveraged family business that has survived on cheap credit and luck. And tonight, the luck ran out. Mom looked at me, tears streaming down her face again, but this time, there was anger mixed with the sadness. How can you do this? She demanded, her voice rising. How can you sit there and dissect us like we are just numbers? We are your family. Madeline, you cannot analyze your own parents like a company. Why not? I asked. You have looked at me like a company for 7 years, a failing company. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark driveway where my rented sedan sat next to Brandon's leased Porsche. When I came home for Christmas 3 years ago, I said, not turning around, I tried to tell you I had crossed the $10 million mark. You interrupted me to tell me I should change my hair because it looked unprofessional. You did not see a daughter. You saw a brand that did not fit your aesthetic. I turned back to face them. I have been a normal company in your eyes for a long time, I said. I was just a company with bad earnings. Now that the earnings are up, you want to invest. That is not love, Mom. That is momentum trading. Father slumped in his chair. The gold pen rolled out of his hand and clattered onto the wood floor. He looked at the blue folder, then at me. For the first time, he did not look like the chairman. He looked like an old man who had bet on the wrong horse for 30 years. He realized the shift. He was no longer the benevolent patriarch offering his daughter a leg up. He was a petitioner. He was standing with his hat in his hand, asking for salvation from the very person he had ridiculed. "So that is it?" Father asked, his voice hollow. "You are going to let us fail? Is that the revenge? You saved the world, but you let your family drown?" "I did not say that," I replied. I walked back to the table and rested my hand on the blue folder. "I am an investor," I said. "I do not make decisions based on revenge. Revenge is an emotional liability. It clouds judgment. And I do not make decisions based on guilt. That is just as expensive." I looked at Brandon, then Mom, then Father. "If I invest in Rhodes Landmark Group," I said clearly, "it will be because the numbers make sense. It will be because you agree to fix the structural rot I found in this report. It will be a hostile takeover, not a partnership. I will dictate the terms. I will control the board. And if the math says no, then the answer is no." I picked up the folder and tucked it back into my bag. "It is not personal," I said, echoing the words Father had said to me 1,000 times when he missed my school plays for a business trip. "It is just business." The morning sun that filtered through the plantation shutters of the Rhodes family estate was bright, unforgiving, and utterly indifferent to the seismic shift that had occurred the night before. I sat in the living room, a fresh pot of coffee on the low table, watching the morning cycle on FNN. The panic of the previous evening had evaporated, replaced by a euphoric relief that swept across the global markets. The anchor, a different one from the night shift, was beaming. "The markets have opened with a roar," she announced. "The Dow is up 400 points in early trading. Analysts are crediting the swift, surgical intervention coordinated by the Treasury and private sector specialist Madeline Rhodes. They are calling her the guardian of the ticker, the young woman who kept the heartbeat of the American economy steady." I took a sip of black coffee. It was strange to hear my name spoken with such reverence in the same room where, less than 12 hours ago, it had been used as a synonym for disappointment. "But the story gets deeper," the anchor continued, leaning into the camera. "In digging into the background of this new financial titan, our investigative team uncovered a fascinating history regarding the Rhodes family business. It seems the Rhodes dynasty has been quietly supported by high-level financial maneuvering for years." My father walked into the room just in time to hear the phrase, "Rhodes dynasty." He stopped, holding his own cup of coffee, looking haggard. He had not slept. None of them had. "What are they talking about?" he muttered, his voice raspy. 3 years ago," the reporter said, bringing up a graphic of a shopping mall in Austin. "The Rhodes Landmark Group faced a liquidity crisis that threatened to bankrupt the firm. Construction had stalled. Creditors were circling. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a bond purchase of $12 million was executed by a shell company called Vanguard Creek, LLC. That injection saved the project and arguably the entire family portfolio." My mother and Brandon drifted into the room, drawn by the sound of the television. They stood like ghosts, pale and shaken. "We have confirmed through regulatory filings," the reporter concluded, "that Vanguard Creek LLC is a wholly owned subsidiary of Harbor Point Capital. It appears Madeline Rhodes has been the silent architect of her family's survival long before last night." The silence in the living room was heavier than the humid Texas air outside. Father turned to me. His face was a mask of confusion that was slowly crumbling into realization. "Vanguard Creek? That was the angel investor from Delaware. We never met them. The lawyers handled everything." "There are no angels in finance, Dad," I said calmly. "Only interested parties." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick binder. I did not toss it this time. I placed it gently on the coffee table. "Vanguard Creek is me," I said. "I set it up the week you told me you were going to have to sell the lake house to make payroll. I bought the bonds. I restructured the debt. I saved the Austin project." Father set his coffee cup down. His hand was shaking so badly the porcelain rattled against the saucer. He walked over to the table and opened the binder. He saw the incorporation papers. He saw the transfer receipts. He saw his own signature on the loan agreement, right next to the electronic signature of the director of Vanguard Creek. Me? For 3 years, he had walked around with his chest puffed out, telling his friends at the club how he had maneuvered his way out of a tight spot. He had lectured me on resilience. He had bragged about his business acumen. And the whole time, his entire reputation was resting on a check written by the daughter he had dismissed as a paper pusher. "You knew," he whispered, "every time I bragged about that deal, every time I told you to learn from my success. You knew." "I knew," I said. "I did not say anything because I did not want to embarrass you. I wanted you to keep your dignity." "Dignity," Brandon scoffed, though his voice lacked any bite. He slumped onto the sofa, looking defeated. "We have been living on an allowance. We just didn't know it." "It was an investment," I corrected him. "At the time, I thought the underlying assets were sound enough to recover. I was wrong. The report I showed you last night proves that—" I stood up and smoothed out my skirt. The air in the room was thick with the smell of burnt ego. "So here is where we stand," I said. "The press is calling us a dynasty, but we know the truth. You are insolvent. The banks are going to be polite to you today because they are afraid of me. But once the dust settles, they will look at your balance sheet again, and without my guarantee, they will pull your funding." "What do you want, Madeline?" Mom asked. She was clutching her pearls, a gesture so cliché it almost made me smile. "Do you want an apology? We gave you one last night." "I do not want an apology," I said. "I want a resolution. I have drawn up a purchase agreement." I pointed to a second document in the binder. "Harbor Point Capital will acquire 100% of the equity in Rhodes Landmark Group," I stated, my voice steady and professional. "I am offering a price that is 20% above current market valuation. It is a premium. It is a gift. It is more money than you would get if you liquidated everything today." Father looked at the document. "You want to buy us out?" "I want to buy you out," I confirmed. "But there are conditions, non-negotiable conditions." I looked at my parents. "Mom, Dad, you retire immediately. You step down from all executive roles. You keep the house. You keep your club memberships. You keep your social standing. You can tell everyone you sold the company to focus on philanthropy. I will even fund a foundation for you so you have something to do. But you do not touch the business operations ever again." Mom looked like she had been slapped. "But the company is our life. It is who we are." "The company is a corpse, Mom," I said brutally. "I am just paying for the funeral." I turned to Brandon. He was watching me with a mix of fear and defiance. "Brandon," I said, "you stay." He blinked. I do?" "I need a CEO," I said. "I live in Chicago. I run an $18 billion fund. I do not have time to manage contractors in Texas. You know the properties. You know the tenants. You stay on as chief executive officer." Brandon sat up straighter. A flicker of hope returned to his eyes. "Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can do that. We can be partners." "Not partners," I cut him off. "Employees." I flipped the binder to the employment contract section. "You will sign a standard executive contract," I explained. "You will report directly to me. You will have quarterly key performance indicators regarding debt reduction, occupancy rates, and operational efficiency. If you miss your targets for 2 consecutive quarters, you will be terminated. No severance, no family discount." Brandon's face flushed red. "You want me to work for you? You want me to report to my little sister?" "I want you to report to the chairman of the board," I said. "The fact that we share DNA is irrelevant to the shareholders, and right now, I am the only shareholder." "This is humiliating," Brandon spat. "I am 32 years old. I built the Clearwater deal." "You built a liability that I am about to pay for." I reminded him. "Look, Brandon, you have a choice. You can let your pride win. You can walk away. But if you do, you walk away with nothing. You have no equity. You have no savings. You have a leased Porsche and an expensive watch. If you leave this room without signing that contract, you are unemployed in a market that knows exactly how much your success was subsidized by me." I let that sink in. I watched the reality of his life crash into the fantasy he had constructed. He realized that without the Rhodes Landmark Group, he was just a guy with a resume full of inflated achievements. Or, I continued, softening my tone slightly, you can take the job. You can actually learn how to run a business properly. You can have the title. You can keep the office. You can be the face of the company in Texas. All I ask is that you actually do the work. The room was silent. This was the deal. It was a golden parachute for my parents and a lifeline for my brother, but it required them to surrender the one thing they valued more than money: control. "You are stealing our legacy," Mom whispered. "You are buying us off so you can control everything. It is cruel, Madeline." "It is not cruel," I said. "It is math. You are drowning. I am offering you a boat. You just don't like the fact that I am the captain." Father stood up. He walked over to the window and looked out at the sprawling lawn he had bought 20 years ago. He looked at the oak trees he had planted. He was a proud man, a stubborn man, but he was not a stupid man. He had spent the night thinking about the near miss 3 years ago. He realized now that he had been living on borrowed time. My time. "If we say no?" Father asked, his back to me. "Then I leave," I said. "I go back to Chicago tonight. I sell the bonds I hold in your company to a distress fund that strips assets for parts. When the bank calls your loans next week, I will not answer the phone. I will not sign a guarantee. You will default. You will lose the company, the house, and the name. You will be a cautionary tale on FNN instead of a dynasty." I paused. "I do not need this company to be rich. Dad, I am already rich. I do not need it to be famous. I am already famous. I am doing this because, despite everything, I do not want to see you on the street. But I am done being the safety net that you spit on." The air in the room was electric. This was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. It was the moment where the power dynamic that had defined our family for 3 decades was permanently inverted. "Madeline," Father said, turning around. He looked old. The bluster was gone. "We built this for you, for both of you." "No, Dad," I said. "You built it for yourself, and that is fine. But now you have to sell it to save yourself." I tapped the binder. "The offer expires at noon," I said. "I have a plane to catch. I have a meeting with the Federal Reserve on Monday morning, and I cannot be late." I checked my watch. It was a cheap digital watch, not a Rolex. "You have 2 hours to decide if you want to be the retired founders of a subsidiary of Harbor Point Capital or the bankrupt owners of a memory." I sat back and poured myself another cup of coffee. I did not look at them. I let the silence do the work. I knew, with the certainty of an algorithm, what they would do. They were practical people. After all, they loved money, they loved status, and I was the only one offering them a way to keep both, even if it cost them their pride. The dinner that evening was a funeral for the Rhodes Landmark Group, though there was no body to bury, only a stack of legal documents resting in the center of the table. The crystal wine glasses had been put away. The silver platters were gone. There was no roast beef, no asparagus, no pretense of a celebration. There was just take-out Chinese food in cardboard cartons and the thick, suffocating weight of surrender. My father sat at the head of the table, but the posture of the chairman was gone. He looked like a man who had walked through a hurricane and was just grateful to still have a roof, even if he no longer owned it. He held a black pen in his hand, hovering over the signature line of the purchase agreement. "This is the right thing to do," Father said, his voice quiet. He was speaking more to himself than to us. "The market is too volatile. I am too old to fight algorithms. This way. Your mother and I are secure. We can retire. We can keep the house." He looked up at me. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just a profound fatigue. "You gave us a fair price. Madeline, better than fair. I appreciate that." He pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound of his signature was loud in the silent room, with a few loops of ink. 40 years of his identity as the owner of an empire were transferred to a subsidiary of Harbor Point Capital. He pushed the document toward me. capping the pen with a finality that echoed off the walls. "It is done," he whispered. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I simply took the document and placed it in my folder. "Brandon," I said, turning to my brother, "the employment contract." Brandon was staring at the paper in front of him. He had not touched his food. He looked torn, physically pained by the decision. To sign meant admitting that he could not make it on his own. It meant accepting that his little sister was his boss. It meant the end of the fantasy that he was the golden heir. "I need more time," Brandon said, his voice tight. "I cannot just sign my life away over lo mein. Madeline, I need a few days. I need to consult a lawyer." "The offer expires at midnight," I said. My voice was level, devoid of emotion. "I am flying back to Chicago tomorrow morning. I need a CEO in place by 9 o'clock. If it is not you, I will call the headhunting firm I use. They have a list of candidates with Ivy League degrees and 20 years of experience who would kill for this salary." "You would hire a stranger over your own brother?" Brandon asked, looking hurt. "I would hire a qualified candidate," I corrected him. "You are the preferred candidate because you have institutional knowledge, but do not mistake preference for necessity. I do not need you. Brandon, I am giving you an opportunity." Brandon flinched. The truth hit him like a physical blow. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. She had been picking at a napkin, shredding it into tiny white piles. Now, the tears started again. "Please," she sobbed. "Please, stop it. Both of you. We are a family. Why does it have to be so cold? Why does it have to be like this?" She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Madeline, honey, I know we made mistakes. I know we were hard on you. But times were different. We just wanted you to be safe. We did not understand your world. Can't we just put this behind us? Can't we go back to being a family? You have proved your point. You won. Now let us just be us again." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life editing me out of the picture because I did not fit the frame. "Go back to what, Mom?" I asked softly. "Go back to me sitting at the end of the table while you ignore me? Go back to you telling your friends I am finding myself while I'm actually running a billion-dollar fund?" "I did not mean it like that," she wept. I was trying to protect you." "No," I said. "You were protecting your image." I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. "I do not need you to be proud of me because I am a billionaire," I said, my voice rising slightly, filling the room. "I do not care about the money. I never did. All I ever wanted for 30 years was for you to believe that I was not useless. I wanted you to look at me and see someone with value, even if I did not own a hotel or drive a Porsche." I looked at Brandon, then back at my parents. "But it seems that my value only became real to you when you saw it on a television screen. You only respected me when the rest of the world told you to." I walked around the table, pacing slowly. "I remember the Christmas party 3 years ago," I said. "You forced me to come. You made me stand in the corner while Father gave a speech about Brandon's visionary leadership on the Clearwater project. You toasted him. You clapped. And that same morning, I had closed a trade that made more profit in 10 minutes than Brandon made all year. But I stood there and clapped too. I let you treat me like the failure because I didn't want to ruin your night." "Madeline, don't," Father murmured, looking down. "And I remember the lunch at the club," I continued, looking at Mom. "I met you there to give you a birthday present. You introduced me to Mrs. Gable as your youngest. You didn't say my name. You didn't say my job. You just moved the conversation back to Brandon immediately. I was invisible. I was already wealthier than everyone in that dining room combined. But to you, I was just a space filler." The room was silent. They could not argue because they knew it was true. They had bet on the wrong child, and they had been cruel about it. Brandon picked up the pen. His hand was trembling, but his jaw was set. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance. I saw humility. "You are right," Brandon said quietly. "I have been pretending. I have been playing businessman with Dad's money. If I don't sign this, I am nothing. He signed the contract. He pushed it across the table to me. I will take the job, Brandon said, and I will hit the KPIs. I want to learn how to do it for real, not the Rhodes way, your way. It was a small victory, but a real one. He was finally growing up, even if he had to be broken first. I gathered the papers and placed them in my bag. The business was concluded. The Rhodes Landmark Group was now my asset. My family was now my staff. Well, Mom said, wiping her eyes and trying to salvage a shred of normalcy. She reached for her phone. It is a new beginning. We should mark the occasion. Come on, everyone stand together. Let us take a family photo. We can post it on Facebook. A new chapter for the Rhodes dynasty. It will look good. She stood up, forcing a smile, motioning for us to gather behind Father's chair. I stepped back. No, Mom, I said. She froze. What, just one picture? Madeline, for memory's sake? I do not want a picture, I said gently but firmly. I want to keep my work and my family separate. I have learned the hard way what happens when you mix them. But people will want to see, she stammered. Now that everyone knows who you are. That is exactly why, I said. I am not a trophy for your social media feed. I am your daughter. If that was not enough yesterday, it is not enough today. I picked up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. The house felt smaller than it had when I arrived. The grand portraits on the walls, the heavy furniture, the expensive rugs, it all looked like a stage set for a play that had been canceled. I walked to the front door. They followed me, a silent procession of ghosts. At the threshold, I turned back. My mother was standing in the foyer, wringing her hands, looking at me with that same mixture of fear and awe she had worn since the broadcast. Madeline, she whispered, do you hate us? I looked at them. I looked at the people who had given me life, and then spent 30 years trying to shape me into something small enough to fit in their pockets. No, I said, I do not hate you. Hate is an investment. I am just divesting. I looked Mom in the eye. You laughed and said I was just a stockbroker when you thought I had nothing. I said, today, Wall Street needs me. The Treasury needs me. But that does not make your words from back then disappear. Money can change how other people look at me, Mom, but it cannot erase what I remember. I turned and walked out the door. I walked past the impeccably manicured hedges. I walked past the statue in the fountain. I walked past Brandon's Porsche. I opened the door of my 5-year-old Toyota sedan. It creaked slightly. The interior smelled like old coffee and fabric softener. It was not a luxury car. It was not a status symbol. It was just a car. I sat in the driver's seat and put the key in the ignition. The engine started with a reliable hum. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it. It was the secure line again. The Undersecretary of the Treasury. They probably needed me to clarify a parameter on the liquidity injection for the Asian opening bell. Billions of dollars were waiting on my voice. The fate of nations was resting on my next decision. I looked back at the house one last time. I saw my parents and Brandon standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the warm light of the chandelier. They looked small. They looked safe. They were protected, not by their brick and mortar, but by the invisible shield I had built. I picked up the phone. This is Rhodes, I said calmly. I put the car in gear and drove away. I was leaving behind the assets, the title, and the dynasty. I was driving back to my apartment, back to my silence, back to the world I had built with my own hands. I had not just bought a company tonight. I had bought my freedom. I had finally stripped them of the only power they had left, the power to decide what I was worth. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really hope you enjoyed Madeline's journey from the invisible daughter to the Titan of Wall Street. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below telling me which country or city you are listening from. Let's see how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear this story. Your support means the world to us, and helps us bring you more emotional and gripping tales. See you in the next story.